in 2001, Daft Punk released their second studio album, Discovery. After breaking into pop culture with their first album, Homework, Discovery showed a major shift in their sound and image, going on to define their legacy and leave a huge impression on music. Today, we're going to dissect the entire Discovery era and the impact it made, starting right where we left off last time in the late 90s. First off, I gotta start with a correction to the last video. I never really mentioned what Thomas and Guy were doing outside of Daft Punk, mainly because it didn't become super important until after Homework released, but I still should have touched on it. So let's start in 1995 with the creation of Roulette. Roulette was a label started by Thomas to carry his solo work, alongside projects by other up-and-coming French producers like DJ Falcon and Alan Braxe. On the label, he released his solo EPs, Tracks on the Rocks Volume 1 in 1995 and Volume 2 in 98. Despite being relatively short projects, they were heavily influential in the French house scene, with songs like Outrun and Club Soda becoming underground hits at the time. Roulette would also be home to Thomas's other collaborative groups, like Together with him and DJ Falcon, and most notably Stardust, consisting of Thomas, Alan Braxe, and Benjamin Diamond. Their one and only song, Music Sounds Better With You, became a decent hit in 1998, but despite the popularity and offers to make an album, the group felt it was best to leave things where they were and return to their other projects. So that's what Thomas was getting up to. As for Guy Man, his work outside of Daft Punk was a lot more low-key, but still pretty significant. Like Thomas, Guy Man also founded his own label, Creedamore, in 1997. Here he would start a new group, Les Nightclub, with Eric Chedeville, whom he founded the label with. Les Nightclub never made a full project, only singles, but using the label, Guy Man signed on several of his friends in the house scene, collaborating through the label's two compilation albums, Waves and Waves 2. Similar to the pair's early work with Darlin, you can see in their solo projects how their two personalities and production styles blend into Daft Punk. While Thomas's work is more focused on repetition and catchiness, very much in the style of Homework, Guy's music goes in a funkier direction, which will show up in this album. Speaking of, work on Daft Punk's second album would begin soon after the Daft and Direct tour ended in 1998. By slowing down their live appearances and branching out into other groups, the pair was able to take their time and flesh out a new sound, rather than just making Homework again. Recording the album would again take place in Thomas's home studio, using much of the same equipment as Homework. Much of the album's inspiration would come from the pair's childhoods and the air of whimsy that came with it. The way they incorporated that into the album's production was by using the clubby sound of Homework as a jumping off point and branching off into other genres and influences afterward, giving the album more depth and variety. In late 2000, it was time to start the rollout. On September 22nd, Daft Punk premiered their new single, One More Time, on BBC Radio. Of course, looking back at it now, we know this song would go on to be a huge hit and define much of that early Y2K era, but in the moment when this song came out, this was a pretty large risk to take. Homework sounded like this, and what they were making now, while still Daft Punk at its core, was taking that format in a whole new direction. Luckily for them, it worked out. When the single dropped in November, it was an instant hit, going #1 in France and topping dance charts in America as well. Something that was new with this song and later on the album was collaboration. Instead of using their own vocals on One More Time, they enlisted the help of Romanthony, fellow DJ and Roulette signee. This was pretty major as Homework was solely the work of Thomas and Guy, but with the new album, they brought in a select group of their favorite house artists, with their contributions adding more and more heart to what was already shaping up to be an incredible album. The strongest influence on its sound was of course disco music, which compared to the rough, grittier sound of Homework, gave this album a more bubbly, almost futuristic sound, further emphasized by the use of voice changers, which while used by the group before, had now become a major part of the album. All of these changes would open up the opportunity for the group to reinvent themselves in the public eye, which they took full advantage of. Known for their stance against flashy interviews and tying their personalities to their music, Daft Punk would double down on this for Discovery. The album was worked on in complete secrecy. Very little interviews were done during its production, and in time for its release, the group would become robots. After experimenting with masks during the Homework era, Daft Punk would pick costumes better related to the new album and more permanent. The robot helmets were custom built and designed by Alterian and featured intricate lighting throughout. Guy's helmet could display a face, while Thomas's could display text. The helmets were actually so complex for the time that they required what was essentially a backpack's worth of equipment to power them, which is why you can see this insane amount of wires sticking out of their heads. It does fit in well with the robot aesthetic, but technically wasn't intentional. To add more theming around the album, they decided to make up lore behind the disguises. On September 9th, 1999 at 9:09 a.m., while working on their next album, Daft Punk was injured by their sampling machine exploding and taking all their music with it. After being treated, the two realized that they had been turned into robots, influencing the new version of the album. I'm a really big fan of silly world building like this. It's completely unnecessary, but I love having trivia like this for artists. It makes things more fun. In February 2001, the album had officially been announced with a release date and preview to journalists. After a 4-year wait, Discovery released on March 12, 2001. Discovery is my favorite Daft Punk album. It is so enjoyable, and I love everything about it. So we're going to go through it track by track, analyzing everything. Starting with the aforementioned One More Time, the album's opening track. I already spoke about this one as a standalone single, but with it placed at the start of the album, I think it establishes the vibe of it better than any other song would've. In interviews, they describe the song as the link between Homework and Discovery, and I think that's very fitting. It retains equal parts of each album and introduces Discovery's changes in a way that isn't jarring. It samples More Spell on You by Eddie Johns, and it does that in a much more complex way than songs were sampled on Homework. As we'll see later, Discovery samples are very quick and easy to miss. Even in this song, it sounds simple in the finished product, but it's actually 3 sections of that song smashed together. The next track, Aerodynamic, is where we see the album properly take off and introduce its new concepts. Aerodynamic sounds nothing like your typical house song. It uses 8 samples of the song E Maquillage Lady by Sister Sledge, and just like One More Time, the samples are quickly cut and then thrown together to make the instrumental. If this was all the song consisted of, it would already be one of their best, but they cut the instrumental to drop in the track's now iconic guitar solo. Again, something this album was really innovative with was blending aspects of different genres with house production, and Aerodynamic does that very subtly, putting disco, house, and rock all in the same track, and it actually being pretty good. After the guitar section, the instrumental changes to this slower space-like synth as it fades out. The most noticeable change Discovery makes over Homework is how its songs, even the most basic ones, have noticeable progression throughout them. They have distinct parts, which even with the repetition still being there, means each track doesn't lose its luster, which was something a couple of the songs on Homework did by running too long. Dang, that would have been a really neat segue. Next track is Digital Love. As the title suggests, this is a love song, the first one on the album. When going back to the inspiration for this album, Daft Punk taking influence from their childhoods, I feel like you see it best in this song. It has a very nostalgic air to it. The lyrics were written by DJ Sneak, the album's second collaborator, and it samples I Love You More by George Duke. I'd say this is probably the brightest, most cheerful song on the album. A lot of it is thanks to the sample, but also again the use of electric guitar. The way it's all executed really makes this one a standout. So coming from a poppy love song, they follow it up with a groovy dance track in Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger. Without a doubt, the most disco-heavy track on the album. In comparison to the rest of it, it honestly feels a little basic in its composition, but the simplicity of it, like in many Daft Punk songs, is its strong suit. It samples Cola Bottle Baby by Edward Birdsong in a way that's a bit more in line with how songs were sampled on Homework. It's still impressive. There's a ton of work going into something that on the surface sounds like an easy loop, but there isn't that same added pizzazz of the forward tracks, which I believe is intentional. If you think about the world this album is based in, which we'll get into later, Harder, Better, Faster sounds like the kind of song the in-universe Daft Punk would make. It's like if Around the World came from a different planet, and I really like how well it fits on the track list. Even the lyrics are deeper than they appear to be on the surface. The song uses its repetitive nature to comment on the soullessness of work culture and how robotic it can be, which fits perfectly because Daft Punk are robots. It's genius. Something else that has been pretty genius so far, similar to Homework, is the track sequencing up to this point. Where the first album builds as it goes on, this one puts most of its strongest songs right at the start to hook you in before slowing down a bit with some of the calmer tracks on the album. It shows how meticulous Thomas and Guy were about their work. There isn't one song on this album that feels misplaced or unfitting. Next track is another particularly groovy one, Crescendolls. This one's a vibe, classic Daft Punk just turning the most nonsensical thing into something danceable. I love it. It samples Can You Imagine by the Imperials and follows Harder, Better, Faster very closely in pace and being upbeat. One thing these songs have all shared in common is having short breakdowns placed somewhere in the track, breaking up the loop before going back to normal or switching entirely. But we haven't seen a song yet where the energy stays like that for the entire runtime. So far, it's all been brief sections, so to change that up, we move on to our next track, Night Vision. I guess you can call this one something like an interlude. It's the shortest track on the album by far, but I still have a strong appreciation for it. It has this sweeping synth that's so relaxing. I really wish Daft Punk did more ambient tracks because they always knocked it out of the park, and with its placement on the album, it gives you a good second to just let things breathe a bit before the album lines back up with Superheroes. Getting back to the sample use, this one features Viva California by Patrick Juvet and Barry Manilow's Who's Been Sleeping in My Bed, with the whole theme of the track coming from the main part they sample from it. Hot take, this one I've never felt super strongly about. I always thought it was just missing something. Even when they bring more stuff in, it's like you're waiting for more to happen and it just doesn't. I still like it, I wouldn't call it bad or anything, but I just don't revisit it that much. Personally, I feel the Alive 2007 version is to blame for this, because that does basically everything I want, and I'm like 90% sure I heard that before I heard the original, so if anything, it's my fault that I don't like this that much. But moving on, there's another really jumpy track, High Life. This was one that grew on me. I remember for whatever reason not liking it much the first time I heard the album, but then over time I started to really enjoy it, to the point where I consider it a favorite now. It takes the track Breakdown for Love by Tavares and chops it to bits. For a long time, this was a lost sample from the album. It was done so well people were unable to track it, which shows because you can barely tell the parts they picked out of it. Anyways, this song is really fast and punchy. The loop is a bit repetitive, which is intentional. I think that's what put me off of it originally, but it's so hypnotic that it pulls you in after a few listens. I also like the break in the middle. A lot of Discovery songs do this, and as I've said before, I appreciate it a ton since it refreshes the track. And on this one, I liked how it fades the sample back in subtly. It reminded me of something you'd hear in a live show, and I just think that's neat. An interesting move we see in the next 4 tracks is the absence of samples. A critique Daft Punk in sampling entirely has always faced is being perceived as lazy. So to combat that, we have 4 completely original songs, and spoilers, they're some of the best on the album. Don't worry about the samples either, by the way. They're gone for now, but they'll be back. Let's start off with Something About Us, the album's second love song. This goes in a completely different direction than Digital Love. The electronic elements of that song and the rest of the album are subdued here, with it mainly relying on guitar and a simple synth. Best word to describe this song would be tranquil. It does everything right, to the point where you don't even notice its runtime. The song is almost 4 minutes long, but with its composition, by the time it's over, you'd think it was shorter than that. It has the perfect vibe, and to bring up the track order again, being near the end is a great way to start winding down the project. It's followed by Voyager, more upbeat but still pretty calm and guitar heavy. This is definitely in my top 3 on the album. Hard to rank it when all the songs are so good, but this one I always really liked. Not only is the synth in this one catchy as hell, but in the middle the track breaks down to add in a harp that sounds straight out of a Zelda game or something. And speaking of tracks reminiscent of video games, Verydisco is entirely that. A 5-minute long adventure with this beautiful flute almost echoing as the drums and synth begin to build over it. It's hard to describe this one exactly. I always thought it had an eeriness to it. Even with how it gets more upbeat over time, there's a coldness there that I find really special. It and Night Vision kinda have that in common. This is my second favorite song on the album, without a doubt. I love the pace it goes at, slowly adding more elements on, but also giving each of those parts time to themselves, and the way the beat is progressively getting faster, it's just all really well executed. Also, fun fact, Verydisco sounds really close to Verydisco. Verydisco flipped around is Discovery. I just thought that was kinda cool. Next up is a major vibe shift with Short Circuit, a very loud buzzy track. Now it's interesting to note, this track seems to be the oldest on the album, dating all the way back to the Daft and Direct tour, which is kind of evident. It's not unfitting, I feel it's better here than on Homework if anything, but it does have a clearly different tone than everything else up to it. Up until the second half, where the beat switches, and then you realize, oh, this is why they put it on Discovery. The second half of this song is really chill. I know a lot of people dislike this song for the first half, which I do understand, but without the opening, the second half wouldn't hit nearly as hard in my opinion, so it ends up paying off in the end. It fades out into the next track, my personal favorite, Face to Face. This song is a masterpiece, one of the most impressive uses of sampling I've ever seen. It used at least 20 samples and makes one of the most infectious loops in their entire discography. I really like the glitchiness of this, since it really is like 90% samples. You get this really interesting splicing throughout the song, which makes it really fun to keep up with, as it's always doing something different. Its vocals are done by the third and final collaborator, Todd Edwards, who fits perfectly on the song. I think the fact that it sounds as good as it does with how cut up it is should be celebrated. It's unreal how they were able to make this, and the fact that 20 years later people are still discovering samples in it is insane. Now time for the album closer, Too Long. As the title suggests, this is a long song, the longest in Daft Punk's studio discography. This one also features Romanthony, and going back to the interviews, it's one of the more house-influenced tracks on the album, but like everything else, it still does its own thing to stand out from other house tracks of the era. It starts out pretty slow and groovy at first, until the beat finally drops around the 5-minute mark, where the song really peaks, making for another favorite moment of mine on the album, and another moment that couldn't have been done without clever sampling. This time it's only 3 tracks, but the album finishes strong, using them just as well as they've used anything else. Similar to Short Circuit, I've seen criticism on this song's length, and again, while I understand that criticism, this is a wonderful example of a slow burn. Once you've committed to sticking out that runtime, it rewards you with the insane second half that plays out the album. I think it was the right move, but I do tend to enjoy long-running songs a lot, so I could just be used to it. And that is Discovery, one of the best albums ever, not even exaggerating. There's something about it that has made it age incredibly well and still sound fresh to this day, which I find most intriguing about it. There's really nothing else you can compare to it. It's still a really unique album. Upon its release, the public also shared those feelings. The album was critically acclaimed by almost everybody and sold accordingly well across the globe. So now, all that was left was what to do next. After Discovery, Daft Punk was bigger than ever. They were able to perfectly master having great music and a great image around that music in a way that didn't affect their personal lives. So they reaped the benefits of it by being pretty public during the album's era. They did a lot of commercials, magazines, interviews. They even redesigned the helmets after a while. It was really cool to see, in contrast to Homework, where you barely saw the group do anything. As for the music though, this is where we take a turn. They dropped a few singles after release, put out Alive 1997, and launched Daft Club, which we'll get into later, but anything new from them was not coming. Like before, the pair would take a break, moving on to their solo projects. Guy would get back to his label, which is when we got the second compilation album, and Thomas would do the same thing, making the soundtrack for the film Irreversible. A funny story from around this time that I gotta mention involves Thomas and his group Together with DJ Falcon. When they were doing a live set in 2002, they debuted this mix of the Stevie Winwood song Valerie, which would become a fan favorite, despite never being released by the pair. Flash forward to 2004, and Eric Prince releases Call on Me. Basically the same song, just slightly enhanced and of course, officially released. No real idea how this happened legally, but Thomas and Falcon didn't care, so I guess it just is what it is. There's a super in-depth video about that specifically that I'll link below, but on the subject of live shows and touring, you may have noticed that I've been pretty quiet on that, for a good reason. In interviews, the possibility of a tour was looking slim, with the group wanting to venture out from DJ sets and focus on the visual presentation of their concerts. Something that, for their aesthetic, was not super possible in the early 2000s, so the Discovery era had no tour and very little live appearances. They did do a couple of DJ sets, but everything else around that time would be solo shows. Two other contributing factors to this being the issue that the original helmets presented being too cumbersome to work in a live setting, and the number one reason being Thomas's tinnitus diagnosis in 2002 that really put a damper on things, forcing him to take a break from performing. So the Discovery era was unfortunately just the wrong place and time for the group to do a tour. But when the time inevitably came, they made the most of it during Human After All's era. With the more broad context of what Daft Punk did after Discovery out of the way, let's tackle the two major things Daft Punk released after Discovery, starting with the album's film, Interstellar 5555. One of the coolest aspects about Discovery is that it's a visual album. Thomas and Guy decided here that instead of making connected music videos, they would make a movie to serve as music videos for each track on the album. Work on Interstellar began in late 2000, with pieces of it released early as videos for Discovery singles, airing on Toonami before the film's completed release in 2003. Working with Toei and legendary manga artist Leiji Matsumoto, the film would serve as a love letter to Daft Punk's childhood, like the album itself, while also giving the songs additional context. If you don't want any spoilers, skip forward a bit, otherwise we're gonna briefly get into the plot. The movie starts with the Crescent Dolls band performing one more time on their home planet, before getting kidnapped by a record executive and hauled onto a spaceship. This is where our protagonist Shep comes in. He attempts to rescue the band using his own spaceship, but by chasing them he accidentally follows them to Earth, crashing in a forest. After getting away, the band is brought to an underground lair, where their memories are erased and appearance altered to look human. Being put under mind control to release music, the Crescent Dolls become a global sensation, big enough for Shep to find out and make a second attempt to save them. He crashes their concert and frees most of the band from their mind control, attempting an escape. This results in a chase between the band and their captors, where Shep gets wounded just before getting away. Moving back to Stella, since she's the only member of the band left under mind control, Darkwood brings her to the Gold Record Awards show, where the Crescent Dolls are nominated. They end up winning the award, and on her way out, the rest of the band is able to rescue Stella and return to Shep, who is succumbing to his injury. In his final moments, he and Stella share a dream sequence, and they venture out to bury him. On the way back, they decide to visit Darkwood Manor, which is of course the most ominous looking place you could imagine for someone like him to live at. It's there where the band discovers his backstory and motivation behind kidnapping both them and many other musicians. His plan is to get 5,555 gold records, and use them to gain control of the planet, with the Crescent Dolls winning the last one. They all get caught and brought to Darkwood's lair, where he's preparing to complete his plan. He attempts to sacrifice Stella to the record machine, but the other members fight back, ultimately knocking the record out of Darkwood's hand and him falling into the abyss after it, along with his guards. The manor explodes as the band gets out, and they make their way to the record label's headquarters to get their memories back, along with the master for one more time. There, Octave is caught and tased, which turns his skin back to normal, and on him, the guards find a piece of Darkwood's journal, realizing what he had done. After this, there is an effort to send the band back to their home, restored to their original identities. Leaving Earth, their ship is attacked by Darkwood's spirit, before Shep's spirit defeats him, allowing the group to return unharmed. As the movie wraps up, we learn everything we've seen is the dream of a kid who fell asleep bumping Discovery. The end. This is such a great movie for a lot of reasons. Firstly, how well it pairs with the album. You can tell this wasn't an afterthought. The album itself was made for the film. In Japan, the Crescent Dolls were even on the cover art, so I find the amount of care put into it to be really special. Also, the fact that the album isn't altered at all I really like. In a lot of album movies, songs get cut or rearranged to fit the plot, but here, it's damn near one-to-one, again showing how intentional they were with making this. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. A lot of people view this as a passion project, which I totally agree with, and regardless of how it may have done financially, it's clear that as a piece of media, it made a big impact, inspiring artists to express their music similarly, which is what good art should always strive to do. A few months after Interstellar's release, we would officially get the final project of the Discovery era, the remix album, Daft Club. Alright, so first off, Daft Club the album is kinda bad, but Daft Club the concept is pretty neat. Discovery released at the height of the Napster era. Piracy was mainstream, CDs were technically obsolete but still legally the leading format, and the music industry was freaking out. So knowing this and expecting it, Thomas and Guy hatched a plan to not fight piracy head on, but reward purchasing. In every copy of Discovery on CD and vinyl, you got a card that when entered on daftclub.com, granted you access to exclusive music and updates released every few weeks. In 2001, this was a very forward-thinking and new idea. Napster itself was still a new concept, so attempting a legal method of MP3 sharing was just as bold. I think Thomas explains it best here. At the beginning, the principle of Napster was something good, that the copyright system is shit and record companies are making lots of money out of it. But to go from that to what it became, and that it made it difficult for new groups or for those who might try to change things. I think what we're doing is a really important step, because it's one of the first experiments on a large scale, one of the first attempts to change online music that's not accessible to everybody. You don't pay for it, but it's not free. You have to buy the CD first. It was definitely an ambitious concept, and in a lot of ways, I see the $5 deluxe album trend that a lot of artists do now as a modern equivalent. But let's get to the content that you got on Daft Club. The big caveat that came with giving out free music in the early 2000s is that music couldn't be all that anticipated. You weren't going to get a whole new album or even deluxe tracks through this, which to their credit, the duo was very open about. You knew going into this that it was a side project for remixes, not brand new stuff. And again, it was free, so you couldn't really complain. In 2003, the site was closed down, prompting its content to be released as a standalone album. Daft Club was released to physical formats on December 1st, 2003, featuring every song from the original site, minus Alive 1997 as that had already been released, and a few bonus songs as well. The main issue with this project is just that remixing Daft Punk is a difficult thing to do, and a lot of remixes on here either don't do enough or flat out butcher the source material, while also running way longer than they should. Like, why are these runtimes so egregious? God. That all being said though, I don't hate it. There's a good amount of gems on here. Nothing that I would really come back to often, but I can hear a lot of these songs and say, hey, that's not bad. The best example of this album's flaws though would be the Basement Jaxx remix of Phoenix. First of all, Phoenix is a song from Homework. That's not really important, but it's just a weird choice. 2, this is not a remix. It's basically its own audio hell that, I shit you not, samples Phoenix for like 10 seconds. Genuinely no clue what they were going for or why it's 7 minutes long, but overall this album has its moments. The Neptune's mix of Harder, Better, Faster is incredible. I don't think the album is nearly as bad as people say it is. There's some pretty low points, but by themselves a lot of these tracks hold up. Obviously they aren't going to surpass the original, so I think it's best to just go into it keeping that in mind. And that is Discovery. This is one of the best albums ever made, and the media surrounding it, I feel, just shows how important fleshing out an idea can be for an album and what it can do. On its own, it's already very good, but then you have loads of other details and lore to dig through, making for an experience that goes miles beyond just having an album and little else. I had so much fun making this video. If you like Daft Punk, subscribe because I got more of these coming. If you like music in general, subscribe because that's what I do here. And follow my socials to get updates on future videos. That's it for this one, everyone. Like, subscribe, stay clouded, see ya.